Industrial Revolution, an 18th to 19th century architecture. In modern history, the process of change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. This process began in Britain in the 18th century and from there spread to other parts of the world. The Industrial Revolution marked a period of development in the latter half of the 18th century that transformed largely rural agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. So, sa Industrial Revolution, dito nagsimula yung mga inventions ng mga machines para makatulong sa paggawa ng mga produkto for the consumers, while at the same time, more efficient and less work for the employees. These are the goods that had once been painstakingly crafted by hand started to be produced in mass quantities by machines in factories, thanks to the introduction of new machines and techniques in textile, iron making, and other industries. Fueled by the game-changing use of steam power, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain and spread to the rest of the world, including the United States, by the 1830s and 40s. Modern historians often refer to this period as the first industrialized revolution, to set it apart from a second period of industrialization that took place from the late 19th to early 20th centuries, and it saw rapid advances in the steel, electric, and automobile industries. One of the things that the Industrial Revolution were able to give us is the technological changes that shaped the world into what it is now, such as new basic materials like iron and steel, new energy sources for the machineries, including both fuels and motive power, such as coal, the steam engine, electricity, petroleum, and the internal combustion engine. And of course, new machineries that inventors were able to create, like the spinning jenny that James Hargreaves invented and Paul Moody's power loom. These inventions permitted increased production with a smaller expenditure of human energy. During the Industrial Revolution, factory systems were introduced. This became a big help as it helped organize the workflow of every factory that runs. This system distributed work to each employee that specializes into something they are assigned to, and as such, it results to them being good and used to their jobs. It entails increased division of labor and specialization of function. It was also in the Industrial Revolution that various transportations were able to be introduced. Thanks to many studies and researches people conducted, it resulted to the creation of steam engine, which then gave way for transportations like steam locomotive, ships, automobile, airplane. Forms of communications were also improved by the telegraph and radio. The increasing applications of science to industry, these technological changes made possible to a tremendously increased use of natural resources and mass production of manufactured goods. The Industrial Revolution was such a large-scale event and gave way into many forms of inventions to the world that it was divided into two periods, being the First Industrial Revolution and Second Industrial Revolution. In the First Industrial Revolution, which started in mid-18th century, innovations like the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom made weaving cloth and spinning yarn and thread much easier. Producing cloth became faster and required less time and far less human labor. More efficient mechanized production meant Britain's new textile factories could meet the growing demand for both cloth at home and abroad, where the nation's many overseas colonies provided a captive market for its goods. In addition to textiles, the British iron industry also adopted new innovations. Chief among the new techniques was the smelting of iron ore with coke, a material made by heating coal. Instead of traditional charcoal, this method was both cheaper and produced higher quality material, enabling Britain's iron and steel production to expand in response to demand created by the Napoleonic Wars, which occurred in 1803-15, and the later growth of the railroad industry, which then lead us to the second industrial revolutions that happened in the late 19th and 20th centuries. In terms of basic materials, modern industry began to exploit many natural and synthetic resources not hitherto utilized, lighter metals, new alloys, and synthetic products such as plastic, as well as new energy sources. Combined with these were developments in machines, tools, and computers that gave rise to the automatic factory. Construction in iron and glass. The Industrial Revolution in Britain introduced new building types and new methods of construction, being cast iron and glass.
For structures and artifacts, the use of cast iron varies from bridges and markets to factories, balconies, and fences. In the late 18th century, refinements produced during the Industrial Revolution made cast iron comparatively affordable and suitable for a variety of uses. It was fashionable as a structure material and often for whole buildings by the mid-19th century, and particularly for elaborately patterned architectural elements such as fences and balconies, until it fell out of fashion as a decorative material after 1900s. It was superseded for structural purposes by new steel and concrete. One of the first major projects was the Iron Bridge in Shropshire, which opened in 1781, a precedent-setting structure constructed almost entirely of cast iron. At the end of the last ice age, the flood of Lake Lapworth created the Iron Bridge Gorge. This culminated in the exposure of valuable mineral deposits near the surface where they were readily extracted, such as coal, iron, fireclay, and limestone. The local area was also a significant center of the new Industrial Revolution, with the river supplying a means of transport. In Paris, an early and elegant use of cast iron for a big city river crossing is the 1804 Pont des Arts. A 9-arc metal bridge for pedestrians was built at the site of today's Pont des Arts between 1802 and 1804 during the reign of Napoleon. It was the first metal bridge in Paris. Initially, the engineers Louis Alexander de Cesart and Jacques Dillon dreamed of a bridge resembling a suspended garden with trees, flower banks, and benches. One of the disadvantages of using cast iron is that it is not a good structural material for handling tension or bending moments because of its brittleness and relatively low tensile strength compared to steel and wrought iron. In a few instances, bridges and buildings built with cast iron failed when the cast iron was used poorly. In the construction of conservatories, iron was often mixed with glass. Early surviving examples include the Sion House Conservatory 1827-30 and the Palm House 1845-47. Naturally, this led to the Crystal Palace, the pinnacle of early Victorian technology. The Crystal Palace was designed by Sir Joseph Paxton for the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. In the mass production of standardized materials and rapid assembly of components, the Crystal Palace contained essential invention, but its principal architectural value lay in its cadence of colossal spaces. Its magic and a collection of buildings for universal exhibits were recognized by French designers in Paris in 1855, 1867, and 1878. Wrought iron is iron that has been heated and handled with instruments afterwards. It consists mainly of iron with 1 to 2% of added slag, by-product of smelting iron ore, typically a mixture of oxides of silicon, sulfur, phosphorus, and aluminum. The iron is extracted from the heat during manufacturing and worked with a hammer while still hot to bring it into its intended final shape. Cast iron is softer and more ductile. When bare surfaces are exposed to oxygen in the presence of moisture, cast and wrought iron are also prone to corrosion. To prevent corrosion, to prevent exposure, iron products should be coated. And in order to cover bare metal, paint is widely used. It was commonly used in building construction in the 19th century but was replaced in the 20th century by steel. Eiffel Tower is the most significant symbol of the 1889 exhibition in Paris, and it was designed by Gustave Eiffel. The idea of a 300-meter or 984-foot tower made almost entirely of open lattice wrought iron by Eiffel sparked amazement, cynicism, and on static grounds no little opposition. The tower acted as the entrance portal to the exposition when completed. Before the completion of the Chrysler Building in New York City in 1929, the Eiffel Tower was the world's tallest structure. Industrial Revolution in America. One of the most important modern styles of construction, the large office building, has become a big initiative in the United States. The tall buildings constructed by traditionalist architects expanded masonry architecture to its limits. They mostly incorporated towers made up of smaller buildings built on each other. Architects and builders may construct tall, slender buildings with a solid and relatively lightweight steel skeleton by assembling a framework of steel girders. The skeleton, which held the weight, suspended the majority of the building elements, walls, floors, ceilings, and windows. Louis Sullivan, 1856 to 1924. He was an American architect and has been called the father of skyscrapers and father of modernism. He is considered by many as the creator of the modern skyscraper and was an influential architect and critic of the Chicago School and also a mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright. His famous dictum is form follows function, a phrase that should not lead one to conclude that Sullivan believed that design should be a mechanistic visual statement of utility. Rather, he believed that architecture must evolve from and express the environment in addition to expressing its particular function and its structural basis. It has been said that Sullivan was the first American architect to think consciously of the relationship between architecture and civilization. An early skyscraper in Buffalo, New York was the Guarantee Building, formerly named as the Prudential Building. It was completed in 1896 and it was designed by Louis Sullivan and Dankmar Adler. Sullivan's concept for the building was based on his idea that form follows function. He and Adler divided the building into 4 zones. The basement was the mechanical and service area, the ground floor public areas, the business floors with similar office cells clustered around the central elevator shafts. The final zone was the termination zone consisting of elevators, facilities, services, and a few offices.
For the next slide, Daniel Burnham. He was born in 1846 and died in 1912. He is an American architect that is considered essential to the American city because of his contributions. He was titled as the most successful power broker the American architectural profession has ever produced because he was also a proponent of the Bush art movement. He was an idealist when it comes to urban planning and developed one of our dreams to design, a skyscraper. That is why he was noted for his highly successful management of the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. For the last one, it was stated that he had prominent roles in the creation of the master plans, including plans for Manila, Baguio, plan of Chicago, and downtown Washington, D.C. Have you heard some of these famous buildings? The Flatiron Building of triangular shape in New York City, Union Station in Washington, D.C., London Selfridges department store, San Francisco's Merchants Exchange, and a number of notable skyscrapers in Chicago. Daniel Burnham designed those. The Flatiron Building. It was designed by Daniel Burnham. It has a distinctive triangular shape and is a 22-story building. It was originally the Fuller Building because it was intended to serve as offices for the George A. Fuller Company, a major Chicago contracting firm. The Flatiron was never the city's tallest building, but always one of its dramatic looking, and its popularity with photographers and artists has made it an enduring symbol of New York for more than a century. For the next slide is about Art Nouveau, an art movement that lasted over 2 decades, so from 1890 to 1910. It was known in different languages by different names. For the first one is Jugendstil in German, second, Style Liberty in Italian, third, Modernismo Catalan in Spanish, and as we all know in English, it is known as the modern style. Its characteristics was often inspired by natural forms such as the sinuous curls of plants and flowers. Other characteristics of Art Nouveau were a sense of dynamism and movement, often given by asymmetry or whiplash lines, and the use of modern materials, particularly iron, glass, ceramics, and later concrete, to create unusual forms and larger open spaces. So after 1910, considered na siya as geologs or old-fashioned just like every other movements that passed. So for the next one is about the Paris Metro Station entrance. So quick background muna about the station itself. So it is a rapid transit system in the Paris metropolitan area, France. It is a symbol of the city and is known for its density within the city limits, uniform architecture, and unique entrances influenced by Art Nouveau. So, kung nakikita niyo dito sa slide na 'to, yung picture na 'yan, that is the actual entrance for this station. So, it was designed by Hector Guimard for the 1900 Exposition Universal. Dun sa last slide, nabasa ninyo na nag-launch ng competition noong 1899 ang CMP or Paris Metro Railway Company for the street architecture ng soon-to-be opened metro. Yung company, medyo concerned sila about criticism of a backlash laban sa industrial style architecture na kakabuilt lang nung Eiffel Tower nung time na yon. But noong 1886 kasi, Charles Garnier, architect of the opera, nag-declare siya ng letter sa minister ng Public Works and ito yung sinabi niya. The Metropolitan Railroad, in the eyes of most Parisians, will only be excused if it rejects absolutely all industrial character so as to be completely work of art. Paris must not be made into a factory. It must stay a museum. Yun yung sinabi ni Charles Garnier. So, ang ending, ang nanalo sa competition ay si Henry Duret. Next one is Antoni Gaudi. He was born in 1852 and died in 1926. He is also an Art Nouveau architect. Yan. So later on, makita natin yung three greatest work for Art Nouveau style na ginawa ni Antoni Gaudi noong time niya. So, Gaudi's work was influenced by his passions in life, which are architecture, nature, and religion. He considered every detail of his creations and integrated into his architecture, such as crafts as ceramics, stained glass, wrought ironwork, forging, and carpentry. He also introduced new techniques in the treatment of materials, such as trencadis, which used waste ceramic pieces. First famous building that he designed is the Basilica de la Sagrada Familia or simply Sagrada Familia. Basically, malaki tong basilica na to but unfortunately, hindi siya tapos. So, yung estimated year na matatapos daw to ay 2026, marking the 100th year of Gaudi's death. However, yung project timeline doesn't consider that it would take until after 2030 to add the decorative detail. So, after 2030 pa daw pwedeng matapos tong church na to kasi mag-a-add pa nga daw sila ng decorative details para doon. So, moreover, alam na ni Anthony Gaudi na hindi matatapos yung church during his lifetime, so he planned the construction in stages. This was done so that the architects of different periods could add their own style to the design of the church. So, naging part yung building na to sa UNESCO World Heritage Site. Ayan. So, last November 7, 2010, pinroclaim ni Pope Benedict XVI yung church na to as minor basilica. For the second one, Casa Batlló. So, as you can see, it was stated that it is in the center of Barcelona. Ayan, kung makikita natin, isang part lang yan ng building, yet it gives us the idea that it has a few straight lines or natural features are obviously present. So the roof is arched and was likened to the back of a dragon. So fun fact, the Casa Batlló was known as the House of the Dragon. A common theory about the building is that the rounded feature to the left of the center, terminating on top in the turret and cross, represents the lance of St. George, which has been plunged into the back of dragon. So the last one is the Casa Milà. This one unique building found in Barcelona in the Catalan region. One look at it and you would probably guess the famous Spanish architect that designed and built it, which is Antoni Gaudi. The casa is popularly referred to as the Stone Quarry because of its appearance. Antoni Gaudi was the resident architect here and built it between 1906 and 1912. Gaudi was commissioned by Pere Milà and his wife, Roser Segimon. These two were quite innovative in their designs. They had self-supporting balconies, underground parking, and the cherry on top is, of course, the rooftop. All these were way before their time, which people at the time found to be strange. The building was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984. It currently serves as the headquarters of the Fundación Catalunya La Pedrera.
Beaux-Arts. What is Beaux-Arts? Is the main fine arts or beautiful arts which is based on the ideas taught at the legendary École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, France. It expanded its own architectural style between 1885 and 1920. It is also known as Beaux-Arts Classicism, Academic Classicism, or Classical Revival. Beaux-Arts architecture is characterized by order, symmetry, formal design, grandiosity, and elaborate ornamentation. Beaux-Arts architecture is all about what we're taught on the architectural style of the neoclassical in the School of Architecture, which is the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. The main purpose of the École des Beaux-Arts, or the Académie des Beaux-Arts, was the training of the young architect generation through an understanding of architectural history and to be able to design such way of great architect style and architecture of the past. It also had a strong influence on architecture in the United States because of the many prominent American architects who studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, including Henry Hobson Richardson, John Galen Howard, Daniel Burnham, and Louis Sullivan. Characteristic of Beaux-Arts architecture. Flat roof. rusticated and raised for its story. Hierarchy of spaces. Arch windows. Arch and pedimented doors. Classical details. Symmetry. Statuary or sculpture. Classical architectural details. Subtle polychromy. All in all, the characteristic of Beaux-Arts architecture. It has a symmetrical form to the exterior design of the buildings. It has a more formal design to the way it looks to people. It has a splendor form to the way the curves and the arches are made. It has a lot of elaborate ornamentation with its sculpture, mosaic, and other artwork. It has arched windows with arched doors mixed in with its slender look. Example of Beaux-Arts architecture. Museum of Natural History. The French National Museum of Natural History owns one of the world's largest collections in natural history. It was established in 1635 by King Louis XIII as the Royal Garden of Medicinal Plants, and in 1793, after the Revolution, it was reorganized its present form and under its present title. The Grand Palais. The Grand Palais is a large historic site, exhibition hall, and museum complex. The Grand Palais is one of the most iconic Parisian monuments. Construction of the building started in 1897, which was the outcome of the contest held among French architects. As there was nothing to choose between the four finalists, the monument actually consists of the work of four architects: Giraud, Thomas, Deglaine, and Lovey, each of whom was responsible for a part of the building. Built on the site of the Palais d'Industrie, the Grand Palais was officially opened on 1 May of 19,000, 2 weeks after the launch of the Exposition Universelle. The structure was built in the style of Beaux-Arts architecture as taught by the École des Beaux-Arts of Paris. The Grand Palais, a monument in stone and steel, with a neoclassical design influenced by four separate architects. The architecture of the Grand Palais de Paris is in two different styles. The large stone walls recall centuries past, when buildings required large windows to enable light to enter, with the building being topped by a vast metal structure with an immense glass house. The result was the nave of the Grand Palais used over 9,000 tons of steel compared to the just over 7,000 in the Eiffel Tower. In addition, the common elements of Beaux-Arts architecture: symmetrical facades, flat or low-pitched roof, sculptural element, masonry exterior, usually stone, prominent columns often paired, balustrades, often a long roof line, and banded restriction. Architectural language of Beaux-Arts architecture. Beaux-Arts is the study and the creation of visual works of art, massive and grandiose, constructed with stone. Classical architectural details such as balustrade, festoon, pilasters, garlands, curtaces, and acrotria. Painting, sculpture, texture, classical or classic, and reproduce.